Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is at the Park Falls Library interviewing candidates in the 2014 elections. We're interviewing Mr. Ken Mandley of Turtle Lake. He's a Republican. He's running in the 75th Assembly District. Mr. Mandley, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you very much.
And this programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Mr. Mandley, we usually start out with people giving us a summary of their bio. I find yours intriguing. 20 years in the military.
Yes, sir.
But go ahead, it's your bio. Give us it.
Yeah, I'm probably one of the more unusual political candidates that can be out there. I'm a retired Air Force officer, and for the last 14 years have been a pastor. There are other retired military people running in various races around the state. And there's other pastors or former pastors running, but I don't know of anybody else that's both a retired military officer and a pastor. And in between, I had a business for a couple of years as well. So I've got a pretty broad background, done a lot of things. So grew up in Madison. I was born in Beloit, raised in Madison. My dad was from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My mom was from Southern Illinois. And so Wisconsin was a good place in the middle. My wife and I have been married for going on 38 years. We've got 2 adult sons. One is active duty Coast Guard, stationed in Long Beach, California, and our oldest son is an industrial electrician in Corpus Christi, Texas. And last year we became grandparents twice. So that's just the short version of some of the things I've done in my bio. Very
interesting career. You started a church, and any particular issues, or why did you decide 2014 you're going to run for the assembly, sir?
You know, we could take our whole interview and talk about that. Among other things, I serve on the Turtle Lake Village Board. I'm one of the trustees of the village. And over the years that I've been involved in leadership in the village, I've run into a number of issues that I kept thinking, you know, somebody ought to do something about that. And I guess a few months ago I was testifying before a legislative committee on some legislation that had huge impact on the village of Turtle Lake. And I walked away from that experience really thinking, somebody needs to understand the importance of government, the actions that both federal and state governments have on communities. And one of the things my dad taught me was that you really aren't supposed to complain about things you're not willing to get involved in trying to change. And so I just decided that the timing was right, my experience was right, my background was right, my values are right to represent our district, and I threw my hat in the ring.
Thank you. One of the big issues I'm sure you're asked about is dealing with schools. Now, yeah. When I talk to candidates, I often ask about school vouchers and choice, but in your case, is the biggest need of schools in your district the problems of rural schools, Mr. Mandley?
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that I was hoping we could talk about for just a couple of minutes is the state school funding formula, which is problematic as it currently is put together. And I'm certainly not an expert. I mean, if we try to get into the nitty-gritty of how that all comes together, even school administrators have trouble communicating and understanding it. But essentially, as I look at it, the current state funding formula is somewhat biased against rural and smaller districts, particularly rural districts that have an equalized property value that's based on recreational property. And certainly in my small district of Turtle Lake, that's true, but that's also true throughout northern Wisconsin. And so I have a lot of concerns with schools, but it happens that school funding and how the state does that is very, very important. Schools are central to small communities. When a small community loses its school, it loses its identity. And so I'm really concerned about the future of education. We've got great schools in Wisconsin. We've got great schools in rural Wisconsin, and we just need to make sure that they stay great.
Let me ask you about two other follow-up questions. Do you generally support the concept of school choice and vouchers, sir?
Yeah, absolutely.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
I'm very much a proponent of school choice. The first, probably the first foray into school choice that Wisconsin made was the ability to register out of district. And frankly, that's been very good for families. It's been good for families in our districts in northern Wisconsin. I think it's been good for districts as well, because districts have had to start looking at students and families in a different way in terms of what is it that students and families are looking for. That concept of choice then expanded to charter schools and some of those other things, and that's worked well as well. And then starting with Milwaukee and then some of the other inner city, the voucher program, and of course that's expanded statewide in a very limited basis.
Yes. Do you think that limit of 1,000 students should come off for statewide?
Yeah. Up where I live in northern Wisconsin in our district, that's really not a significant issue.
I understand.
If it does come off, it would need to be, in my view, it would need to happen gradually. It would need to happen systematically with a lot of thought put into it. Okay. I'm really far more concerned with trying to maintain the quality of the schools that we have and really look at the school funding itself. In general, I am a proponent of choice. I think choice is good for people and it's good for institutions.
The last issue on this subject I want to ask you about, I think you say on your website that Common Core was developed without input from parents.
Yeah.
Are you saying that Wisconsin should join states like Louisiana and withdraw from Common Core, Mr. Mandley?
I think that school boards ought to have the decision on whether to participate in Common Core. I mean, I could spend a long time talking about the problems that come with Common Core. It started, in my view, with not having complete input from all the stakeholders. I don't know if you've ever tried to read any of the standards. I have. I've actually gotten online and downloaded some of the standards and tried to read them and understand them. I have a master's degree of education. I've worked in education for adult education, and frankly, I couldn't understand the standards. And I kept thinking, of course my kids are grown, but I kept thinking if I was a parent and I was trying to read these standards and figure out what is my third grader really supposed to know at the end of the school year, or my fifth grader, or my high school senior. As a parent, I'd have great difficulty understanding that. And I'm not sure that that's the right kind of standard we want. A standard that parents, who are an incredibly important stakeholder, would have difficulty understanding, and there's many other problems with it. The biggest problem is that as it's being implemented today in Wisconsin and across the United States, local school districts, school boards who are responsive to citizens and parents really don't have a choice, and that's the biggest problem.
Thank you. On other issues, let's talk about health care. As you know, the federal government told states, if you expand your MA program, we will pay for it the first few years.
Yeah.
Governor Walker and leaders of both the Senate and the Assembly said thanks, but no thanks. Was that the right decision, sir?
Yeah, I do. I think it was the right decision. And here's the problem. What Uncle Sam gives, Uncle Sam can and often does take away. And so if we were going to go into it saying, well, listen, the federal government's going to pick up 90% right now, and then I think the plan was to reduce that to 75%. And if there was somehow a guarantee that that would never change, maybe I'd feel different. But there is no guarantee. What the federal government has a horrible habit of doing is pulling the states into some federal program and then withdrawing the funding for that program, leaving the states holding the bag. And that's a real problem. Okay. And from that aspect of it, I'm really leery about buying into a federal program that we don't know where the funding's going to come from in the future.
I don't have to tell you how important roads and highways are to western Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But there's a projected $650 million shortfall in the next two-year budget for the Department of Transportation. Do we delay some of these projects or raise taxes, or How do you fill that hole, sir?
Yeah, you know, there's some issues that there's no good answer, and I think transportation is one of them. I think you have to go back in the history of Wisconsin for a few years at least and really try to figure out how do we get where we are before we can figure out how we can get out of the hole that we're in. And part of that is understanding that the transportation fund was rated to pay for general obligation fund bills. And by doing that, we actually had to go out and borrow money for transportation we wouldn't have had to borrow for had we not pulled that money from the transportation account. Well, every dollar you pay in interest is a dollar you can't pay on a project. And so that's where we are, and we certainly don't want to get into that hole any further. On the other hand, we all understand that our highway infrastructure, our roads, our bridges are really critical to the economic health of our state and to really just the well-being and safety of our citizens. So we can't just ignore infrastructure as it crumbles. Now, I'm not a member of the legislature, and so I can't really look into it and say, are there efficiencies that the department could find? But if I were a member of the legislature, I'd start with that. And I hope that question is being asked. Start with looking for efficiencies to make sure that we are spending what money we do have as efficiently and effectively as possible. The three options I've heard for trying to address the shortfall, none of them, frankly, in my view, are good options. You know, the first is tolls, and I would hate to see Wisconsin turned into Illinois. Every time I drive into Illinois, the roads aren't very good anyhow. I just don't see tolls as a real viable solution for all of our highways. Now, on a limited basis, perhaps we want to put in a high vehicle occupancy lane. We might build that and pay for it with a toll for those who choose to use it in a high vehicle count traffic area. But that would be a real limited thing. The second option I've seen is increase in gas taxes, and I'm really opposed to that at this point. I mean, I have seen nothing that would lead me to say I could be a proponent of that based on what I know presently. Okay. Wisconsin's one of the highest gas taxed states in the United States, and I just don't see that being viable. The third option is raising registration fees. I don't like that. And yet it seems to me that of the three options I have seen, that's probably the most viable. Again, if we do it gradually, systematically, with some thought put into how we're doing it.
Okay. Because it's so timely, I'm asking all candidates this. Your reaction to Judge Crabb's ruling on same-sex marriages, sir?
I think it was an unfortunate ruling. I think that anytime we have a federal judge intervening in what really is a state prerogative, that it's unfortunate. I think that Judge Crabb did the right thing. Unfortunately, it was 10 days late or so in staying her own order. And I think she did that. What I read her quote was she recognized that her order was somewhat contentious and might not stand up upon appeal. And you know, the people of Wisconsin spoke in 2006 in a very lengthy process that took a number of years, and the people of Wisconsin spoke, and I wish that Judge Crabb had not intervened in what really is a state matter.
And you were one of those in 2006 that voted for that constitutional change?
I did.
Two candidates for Attorney General say first offense drunken driving should be a crime. Do you think it should be, sir?
Well, that's another one of the issues that's really hard. I can see arguments on both sides of it. I'd say that we need to look very hard at the consequences of those kinds of decisions. Because there's always unintended consequences. What I would hate to see is jumping into the situation, further criminalizing a person, causing them to lose a job, and perhaps even pushing them into criminal activity even further. I certainly don't want anybody to construe that as meaning that I support driving while drunk. I don't. I think it's a horrible thing. But I want us to look at that very closely to make sure that we're not doing something that have consequences that we don't intend.
Okay. Also debated in Washington and Madison are calls to raise the minimum wage. Do you have a position on that, sir?
Yeah, it's another one of those things that, you know, my emotional response is, man, yeah, let's give them more money. You know, I entered the workforce at a minimum wage job, and for the next several years went back and forth between minimum wage and just above minimum wage. Paid for my first car with a minimum wage job. Helped pay for college with a minimum wage job. I remember the first 5 cent an hour raise I got and how thrilled I was when I got that raise. But again, a lot of things that we might think of that emotionally we might respond to and say, man, that's a great idea, have far-reaching and unintended consequences. What I'm more concerned about than raising the minimum wage is encouraging a climate where we've got good wage jobs for people once they've entered the workforce, then to move into a higher paying job. Unintended consequences of raising the minimum wage without forethought and without a lot of study would be potentially things like losing the opportunity for a entry-level person to get into the workforce. And in some cases, raising minimum wage has had the unintended consequence of harming the very people it was intended to benefit.
We're almost out of time. I have 2 more quick questions. Have you been asked your position on the mine up here? And if so, have you taken a position?
You're talking about frac sand?
Nope, the iron mine.
The iron mine.
Ashland,
you know,
that's iron counties.
Yeah, that's out of my district.
That's out of your district?
That's out of my district, and frankly, it's not really in my radar very much.
Okay.
Frac sand is a big deal for us. So I can tell you my general...
Please do, on frac sand.
Yeah, whether it's frac sand or the iron mine. I believe that we need development. But we need development that's orderly, that's systematic, that's well thought out. And in the case of development that can seriously harm the environment, development that has appropriate oversight. And so whether you're talking frac sand or iron mines, that would be my general position.
Okay, and then finally, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent in the August 12th primary?
Sure. My opponent and I think, share many of the positions and values and beliefs. I've looked at his website. I'm sure he's looked at mine. I don't know him well. I've met him. He seems like a fine young man, and everything I know about him I actually admire. The difference is that I've got 37 years, I think it is, more life experience. You know, in a lot of things, I've been there, I've done that. I have proven leadership. I had to learn in my Air Force career, I had to learn to be able to stand up and defend those things I believed in, even when there was a lot of pressure to do something else. And really, I think the primary election is about experience more than anything else.
Thank you. Mr. Ken Mandley of Turtle Lake is a Republican candidate in the 75th Assembly District. Mr. Mandley, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Okay, and thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.